balancing with normal court processing among cases that would all normally have been sent to court but were diverted to restorative justice. And the British studies compared cases assigned to restorative justice in addition to what they would have got normally. And they were compared to those who received only conventional justice. Incidentally, I'm not planning, I hope, to speak for the entire hour, so please, I'll be very keen to receive your questions in the time that's remaining after I finish. So just to show you the overview, as it were, before I go into a little bit of detail about the findings, what do we conclude from these studies on the offending side? We found that across all of these studies, it certainly slows down future offending by many of our offenders. Some stop completely, and others are unaffected. And of course, I'll be talking a lot more about that in a moment. We think that there are indications that restorative justice may be best used for the most prolific offenders. And we found that on average across our British trials, according to an independent evaluation conducted by the University of Sheffield, there was on average a 27% reduction in repeat convictions for the offenders who had experienced restorative justice. In terms of offences, it appears that it's more effective for violent crime than property crime, although it may be that it's more to do with the level of seriousness of the offence rather than the violence property distinction. It certainly seems to be wasted because it is a resource-intensive intervention. It seems to be wasted on minor offences. It seems much more sensible to use it with more serious crime. And in terms of the victims, here we have, we believe, unequivocal evidence now on the greater benefit for most victims who decide they are willing to meet their offenders, which of course is not all victims, but for those who want to do it, there are very significant benefits we find. So actually that should read 5 of the 11 tests are diversion to restorative justice, 6 are adding it, 2 of them after sentencing, 4 before. For the diversion from criminal justice, in the Australian studies, we had violent offences committed by offenders up to the age of 29, and property and shoplifting offences committed by juveniles. We also in England had an experiment where juveniles being given what is called a final warning by the police. These are young people who've been in some trouble with the police, but they are on the point of going to court. If they don't change their ways, they're given a final warning by the police, and we had both violence and property offences included in those experiments. When we added restorative justice to conventional justice before sentence, after a guilty plea, these were burglary and robbery cases serious enough to go to the higher court in London, the Crown Courts. And in our Northumbria experiments, we had similarly violence and property cases, but at the magistrates' court level, less serious crimes. When we were adding restorative justice post-sentence, we had a probation experiment, as I mentioned, where the restorative justice meeting took place at the beginning of the community sentence. With our prison experiments, we had the restorative justice meeting as close as we could manage before people were being released from prison. So here is the first of my questions, and I'm going to answer it from our research. So in general, what effect do these face-to-face meetings have on the frequency of reconvictions across different points of criminal justice when there are personal victims intended to be there? I say intended to be there because there were occasions when they were not there, but they were essentially crimes that had victims. We did have a very high level of attendance by victims, but there were occasions when, for different reasons, they weren't able to be there. And we found that in 9 out of 10 of these tests, there was less crime for the restorative justice group than the control group. And the experiment that failed was one of our Australian experiments, and you will see it coming up and again because it failed very badly. And I think it was one of the most important things that we learned, that restorative justice is not necessarily benign. Many people seem to think that the worst that restorative justice can do is to have no effect. Well, we certainly showed that it could have an effect in completely the wrong direction. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And I'd like you to particularly take note of the results for the prison and probation experiments. And this line graph demonstrates these results. Here we have at the end juvenile property experiment in Australia, where we actually managed to increase property offending by our juveniles relative to the court-treated cases by about 300%. It was quite shocking to be responsible for such a big failure. However, our other experiments have proven much more positive, if you like, in terms of restorative justice. And you can see that there are some very striking results. The 52% JVC refers to the juvenile violence experiment in Canberra, a very pleasing reduction in subsequent reoffending there. Again, the young people in the Northumbria final warning, a reduction of 48% relative to the court, to the people who didn't get restorative justice. And the prison and probation cases also a very pleasing reduction in the restorative justice group relative to the group who did not receive restorative justice. If we include the experiment where we didn't have victims present, we find that